Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at the VHU, the Military History Institute in Prague in the Czech Republic, and we are taking a look at an experimental version of the first semi-auto pistol to actually be manufactured in Czechoslovakia. So this is a 32 ACP version of the Fox pistol. The Fox was designed by one Alois Tomiška, who was a Czech. Now, he was a Czech born before the actual founding of the independent state of Czechoslovakia, which came about after World War I. He initially went to work as an arms designer and arms manufacturer in Vienna, in Austria, where he produced the Little Tom pistol, which is actually a play on his own name. The Little Tom was the first double-action commercial pistol to be manufactured. It's a pretty cool design. He was making them in Vienna. We're not entirely sure what he did during World War I, but it appears that he ended up at the Skoda plant near Pilsen in what would become Czechoslovakia. After the war, he is one of a group of guys who found what's called the South Bohemia Armory, or South Bohemia Small Arms Factory, where they go to work making guns. And the first pistol they produce is a 25 ACP little civilian pocket pistol that they call the Fox, or the Model 1922. Now, Tomiška thought that there might be some opportunity to also market this pistol to the police, and so he had the factory work on a scaled-up version in 32 ACP. That may not really sound like much of a scaling up to us today, but back in the 1920s and 30s and even after, 32 ACP was a pretty common police cartridge. 25 was for your concealed gun, and 32 was, well, it was a pretty typical police cartridge. So this is the first prototype of the Fox in 32, and it has two particularly interesting features to it. So let me show you those. So first off, the only marking on the gun is a serial number 1 up here, aside from this marking on the grip, which I believe is a museum inventory number from way back in the day. You might notice that there is no trigger guard on this pistol and no obvious trigger. Well, this has a folding trigger here. This really kind of does make sense for a concealed pocket carry gun to keep it as small and unobtrusive as possible, as well as reducing weight. The switch here is a release, boink, for a spring-loaded trigger that pops down. And that's how the gun is fired. You can then just snap it back up in place when you're not using it. So if you're shooting right-handed, that button is nicely under the trigger finger. We also have a manual safety back here. That's safe, that's fire. And this looks like it's got this weird sort of plunger system. In reality, what we have here is basically a full-fledged pistol underneath this, well, slide shroud. So first, pop the magazine. The next step in disassembly is to remove the main spring, which is under this bayonet lug attached front cap, kind of like the FN 1910. So that comes off, recoil spring comes out. Then we have this lug here, which just presses sideways out of the gun. This is a lug that engages with the barrel lugs. So we have barrel locking lugs that look very much like a Browning, like an FN 1910 sort of pistol, but instead of the barrel rotating into place, you just slide it in and then put this lug in, which locks through those lugs and locks the barrel to the frame. At this point, we can also slide out the slide. Unfortunately, this gun is missing its striker and striker spring, but they were pretty typical standard style of construction. At the back end here, we have the block that the striker is going to rest against, right there. Really nothing else of particular note in here, a regular extractor. But you can see that this looks like a totally complete normal pistol slide, and so one has to kind of wonder, what's the point of this extra shroud on top? Well, let me take off the grips first, and then I will show you. All right, there we go. And now, if we look at the edges, you can see that the middle section here, essentially the front strap and the back strap of the pistol, are separate parts. So there's a, you can see a line there, a line there, and they go all the way down the back of the grip. What's going on here is that the frame itself, from here up over the top and all the way down the other side, is a single piece of sheet metal that is rolled over into the shape of this shroud and frame. You can think of this almost like a further evolved take on the German Jaeger pistol. So the Jaeger had 4 pieces that were pinned together to essentially build the frame: a left side, a right side, a front strap, and a back strap. What this does is take the 2 sides and turn them into one continuous piece, which is kind of cool. That avoids the necessity of some relatively complicated milling operations to open up the inside of a magazine well. Like today, that's done by sometimes casting or electrical discharge machining. This is a neat way to do it. And interestingly, this was actually not an idea of Tomiška's. This was an idea that was patented by the guy who was basically the shop manager or the floor manager of the South Bohemia Armory, a guy named Huttner. He filed a patent for this system in 1920, got it approved in 1922. So that's kind of cool. And to me, that explains what this shroud is. The shroud is not there because there needs to be something protecting the slide. The shroud is there because that allows them to manufacture the bottom of the frame as one continuous piece over the top of the gun. All right, and there's the whole pistol field strip, still in the white. This was the one and only prototype made of this in the .32 caliber size. Never finished, never actually put into production. In total, about 1,500 copies of the original Fox pistol like this were manufactured. It was then redesigned to actually incorporate a traditional normal trigger guard. At the same time, the manufacturing quality was increased quite a bit. The first model Foxes had a fair amount of hand fitting to each gun. The second models basically had completely interchangeable parts. South Bohemia was really kind of ahead of the curve on that sort of industrial manufacturing quality control, which is kind of cool. Now, at the end of 1922, the factory administration decided that this .32 caliber version just wasn't going anywhere, so they scrapped the project. South Bohemia would continue to evolve as a company. In 1923, it acquired a factory in the town of Strakonice. They moved there, well, they slowly transitioned manufacturing from the Pilsen area to Strakonice, and in 1923 changed the company name to Česká Žebrovka in, well, the name on the guns that they made was Česká Žebrovka in Prague, because that's where the headquarters were, but the manufacturing was done in Strakonice, and this was the beginning of what would become a very substantial firearms manufacturing center in Strakonice that would be making Czech firearms all the way up into the Cold War era. So this is essentially where that whole CZ story starts, which is pretty cool. And of course, it's got some neat manufacturing quirks to it as well. So I'd like to give a big thanks to the VHU for giving me the opportunity to come here and check out this pistol and show it to you guys. If you find yourself in Prague, definitely take some time to stop by the Army Museum here. There's lots of cool stuff on display there, including an entire wall of odd and unusual Czech prototype firearms that are pretty cool to check out. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.